All right, let's get started today, folks. Welcome to the webinar. We are really excited to have Rachel Wilson back. For those of you who came to our tech summit back in the fall, it was a smash hit. Rachel left the stage and multiple people came up to us and said, I could pick her brain for days, hours, weeks. The time frame was never ending. And so we are very excited to have Rachel back for a popular Ask Me Anything version today, very popularized by Reddit. Today would not be possible without Darktrace. So thank you, Darktrace, for your sponsorship. And we're going to turn it over to Josh here in just a second. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Aaron Bach, managing partner of Opkalla. Opkalla is a fast growing, trusted advisory firm based here in Charlotte, North Carolina, with over 300 plus customers, and we operate in the following areas. Why you use or come to Opkalla is to learn more about what is out there, how to solve problems more efficiently in a transparent and unbiased way. So our goal is to help you find solutions better, faster, more efficiently. And like I said, today is not possible without our sponsor, Darktrace. So we want to thank them up front. They're allowing us to bring Rachel back. And so I want to turn it over to Josh Leslie from Darktrace just to give an overview, and then we'll get started.
Awesome. Aaron, I really appreciate it. If you don't mind, I'm going to steal share really quick. And Aaron, if you can let me know, you can see my screen correct at this point?
Yep, we can see it.
Perfect. Aaron, thank you once again. It's always a pleasure and honor to be part of the Opkalla events and to be partnering up with you guys alongside. Definitely very excited to get into the Rachel Wilson Q&A coming up here in a few minutes. For those of you who missed the Tech Summit last time, absolutely amazing time. You're in for a whirlwind here in the next hour or so. I did want to take just a quick minute there to talk a little bit about the work that Darktrace is doing alongside Opkalla and our partnership, specifically down here in the Southeast where I operate most of my business. And folks, obviously, I mean no insult, right? You all know your security priorities, your challenges, your roadmap better than anybody ever will. But I do spend all day long talking to folks like you, IT leaders, InfoSec leaders, as well as my own clients. And there's definitely some high-level similarities that come to mind and have bubbled up. You know, very short and sweet. They're struggling, facing challenges in ways that they are looking to harden their security posture with very limited resources in the face of an evolving threat landscape. And in a lot of ways, in the face of their own attack surface at their organization, expanding as they move more into hybrid infrastructure, as they move more into third parties or into supply chain applications, expanding that level of risk that they're struggling with. So folks come to us here at Darktrace for pretty simple reasons. They're looking to do more with less, right? They're looking to be proactive as opposed to reactive with the security posture. They're looking to give their teams tools that allow them to stay one step ahead of the game, so to speak. And so in answer to that call, Darktrace has rolled out what you guys are looking at here, our continuous cyber AI loop. It's an always-on AI feedback loop that feeds in the outputs of one part of the platform into and enhances and integrates with the rest of the platform itself so that we can do our work better, more efficient, and more effective for you all. Now, technically speaking, these are 4 separate product families, and our clients start in a number of different locations depending on their security priorities as well as their risk tolerance. But the one thing they all do have in common is at the core of any Darktrace technology is our self-learning AI engine. And what this AI brain is looking to do is understand very simply what normal looks like for our clients' environments. So what does normal network traffic look like? What does the normal behavior of a user or a device or a SaaS account or an inbox or the larger email environment at large within the environment? And we're taking that innate and native understanding of what normal looks like, and we're applying it to solve a number of different problems that our clients bring to us on our doorstep. So whether folks are externally focused, looking at their attack surface, hoping to uncover and identify things like shadow IT, cloud misconfigurations, brand abuse or phishing websites, or very simply entry points or vulnerabilities on the surface into the network itself, or whether they're looking to understand a bit more granular. If one of those vulnerabilities on the surface is exploited and taken advantage of, where can that user, where can that threat actor go within my environment? What are the attack paths? What sort of data can they access? What kind of users can they gain access to? Very simply put, how quickly can I get my head wrapped around it? How quickly can I contain this breach if and when that vulnerability on the surface is taken advantage of? Folks also come to us looking to augment their detection capabilities, right? Looking to do more with less once again. That's very evident for our client here, one of our financial organizations where we identify a patient 0. So we're looking at a pre-stage ransomware attack here. This endpoint's doing some network scanning activity. We're identifying the lateral movement, the transfer of that executable worm throughout the environment. And lastly, we're taking it a step further and showing you which rare external endpoints, those C2 command and control servers, that patient 0CJD is beaconing out to. And we're also showing the blast radius internally, functionally letting most of our clients get from detection, skip investigation, get straight to response and mitigation on that side of things. People also come to us, especially around the holidays, looking for 24/7, 365 eyes on glass look when it comes down to response, which came in handy, obviously, with this client where we see an insider threat or a compromised user attempting to exfiltrate a large amount of data off of the network from their finance file server, as well as from their backup. We also trace this attack cross coverage over into their SaaS environment for O365, SharePoint, and Dropbox. And we also, with our C sensors, were able to maintain eyes on this threat as the user attempted to evade visibility and get off the network and exfiltrate a large amount of data that was stored locally on their device. So a number of different ways you can use our platform. Lastly, the one thing that I will say that people come to us very simply for, especially smaller organizations, a leaner security team, is looking to shore up those entry points. So we're looking at email as a standalone solution to shore up just one of the entry points, one of the most popular attack vectors. So again, at the end of the day, it really does depend where you are at in your security journey about the value that Darktrace could or could not bring to the table. And folks, I'm not naive or egotistical enough to think that a 4.5, 5-minute presentation really locks in and gets you all the information you need. That's why I run very high level 30-minute demos as well as 30-day free trials. That way we can sit down, have a very honest, open discussion around your security priorities, your challenges, as well as what we've done with clients that have those exact same concerns and challenges. So my contact info is up on the screen. Feel free to screenshot it. I'll put it in the chat as well. Feel free to reach out to me through Opkalla any way you can to get in touch. I'm happy to sit down and have a quick chat and kind of see where things go. With that though, folks, I am at time. So I'm going to pass it back to Aaron, get back to the main stage and get on to Rachel.
Awesome, Josh. Thank you very much. And if you did not get Josh's contact info, please feel free to reach out. We will have it. We can share it with you. Now for the star of our show, and we're hoping technical difficulties do not get in the way. But for those of you, like I said, Rachel was a keynote at our tech summit in the fall. Rachel spent the first 15 years of her career at the NSA. She's the head of cybersecurity for Morgan Stanley Wealth Management and Investment Technology. And like I said, former chief of operations of the NSA. She is known for countless cybersecurity achievements, including countering terrorism in the 2012 Olympics for cyber threats, leading the planning and execution of thousands of cyber exploitation operations against a wide array of foreign intelligence, military, and cyber targets, serving as the committee official for many of NSA's highest risk and most important intelligence gathering activities, being named one of the top women in tech in 2020 by ThinkAdvisor, and so much more. Rachel, if you are there and hopefully your video is working, welcome today. We are excited to have you. Here's the moment of truth, everyone. We were having some technical difficulties before. We're hoping that she can jump on here in a second. Today, like I mentioned, the format is going to be an Ask Me Anything. If you've read Reddit before, if you've been on Reddit or popularized there, the goal is for you all to ask as many questions. So in the bottom of your Zoom chat, there's a Q&A function. If you have questions, please put your questions there. We're going to have Rachel join and answer those questions. We also have a few questions that have already been submitted on your entry or your submission to join the webinar. So we've got a couple of those. But before we get started, I want to make sure Rachel is on with us and she can hear us. Rachel, can you hear us now?
I can hear you and see you, Aaron. Can you guys hear me?
We can hear you. We cannot see you, but we will take that for now. If video becomes an option, great. But audio, you sound clear. So let's go with that for now to avoid delays, and we can try video throughout. So Rachel, thank you for joining us. I'll kind of kick this off. So the first question for you is, cybersecurity used to be about the best of breed point solutions. Where do you see security programs going? And do you think it's going more towards consolidation, or do you see it continuing to stick with best of breed? And she's gone with that question. I apologize, folks, for the technical difficulties. If we continue for a couple more minutes, we may reschedule this, but she was on for a second. If you all have other questions in the meantime, Josh and I are happy to answer any questions. I'll start with the one that was just asked to Rachel, and then she can jump in. Cybersecurity has always been about solutions, and that's mainly because of the way that the industry has worked. I guess from Opkalla's perspective, we are seeing some organizations consolidate. For example, in the Microsoft ecosystem, every day there's an organization will come out and say, we want to be more aligned with Microsoft and have more tooling in Microsoft, for example. Others have gone the complete opposite way and gone to more service-based approach, managed approaches, best of point solutions in the individual categories. So I don't know if there's a single answer that is correct, but I think we're seeing consolidation in certain organizations that are trying to run lean, and we're seeing some organizations go the opposite way because maybe they're frustrated with Microsoft and the consolidation. Let's see. So I think I see Rachel joining now. Rachel, can you hear us now?
I can hear you. Hopefully you guys can hear me. I don't know what's going on with the internet in New York City, but it's definitely a sign of end times.
Hopefully it's nothing too bad. Rachel, we can hear you loud and clear now. I'm going to ask you the question that we asked before. So cybersecurity used to be about best of breed point solutions. Where do you see security programs going today? Do you see it going more towards consolidation, sticking with best of breed, other? How would you respond to that?
Well, it's a great question, Aaron, and I'm glad we're talking about it. I know it was a big topic, when we were all together in Charlotte. And I think it's, what I'm really seeing is that those point solutions are becoming increasingly difficult, for all of the clients and customers I work with, difficult for them to manage themselves. And so, I can tell you from firsthand experience, when I came to Morgan Stanley into this role, you and I have joked about this, like Aaron as friends. We had more than 200 point solutions in our environment. I would argue many of them performing very redundant, duplicative, repetitive functions and consuming a whole bunch of bandwidth right off the top. But, we had a culture where everybody just kind of bought whatever they wanted, and we had a lot of solutions in the environment. Again, very redundant, very complex. And it was creating all kinds of problems, right? Not only was it tremendously inefficient, but it was taking a serious performance hit, like on our desktops and even in our network environment. And it was also creating all kinds of alert fatigue within our SOC, just because, again, we had installed like 14 products to do the same thing. We didn't know what we were doing from an endpoint versus a network perspective. This is why I think the move towards consolidation, or maybe as I would put it, like a rationalization of all of these, piece, point in time solutions, that's really, I think it's where we're headed, and I think it's the right place to go. We have to have an overall stack that is integrated, that is harmonized, that is managed, and trying to do that with, 200 different point solutions, it's just not sustainable.
Yep, I agree. And I answered the question from our perspective right before you got on. I think it's very similar. Rachel, another one, and I actually have a funny story about this one. So my father, who is not tech savvy, attended our tech summit and never listens to me ever when I tell him to stop writing down his passwords, etc. So after tech summit, he said, I think I'm finally going to get a password manager. And I said, well, if that's what we got out of tech summit, then I am more than thrilled. So anyways, you got my father, who doesn't listen to anything tech, to get a password manager. But along the same lines, someone asked, last time you spoke, you mentioned an early step for a security program is a password manager tool. Very important. What are other examples of early steps such as these that you can take for an organization that can tremendously help bring up the level of security in a program?
Well, it's funny that you say this, and I have to tell you, Aaron, if we accomplish nothing else than getting your father to use a password manager, I agree with you. That was like the best hour of the year, and all of our parents need to be taking that advice. But it really is, it's in line with what you and I talk about all the time, which is, this doesn't have to be over the top onerous. It doesn't have to be a massive impediment to business. It doesn't have to be wildly expensive. There are these things we can do right up front that go a very long way, especially when we're looking at small and mid-sized companies, right? You know, they don't want to have these crazy multi-million-dollar cybersecurity programs. And so when you think about those early days, even just this morning, you know, I was with a company here in Midtown where they asked the same question. And what I said to them is, if you guys can just do some of the basic hygiene things right, that will go a very long way. You think about these companies, you know, they don't even have like the basic asset inventory, stuff that makes those of us who have been in the cybersecurity space for a very long time break out in hives, right? This idea that you don't know what your hardware is, you don't know what software you're running, you don't know what your normal build looks like because everybody's doing their own thing. So getting some of that like brass tacks, hardware, software, inventory stuff right, and then having continuous monitoring around that, you know, how are you going to be able to detect, you know, everybody wants to do sexy anomaly detection, but if you don't even know what your basic baseline looks like, no way you're going to be able to detect anything strange going on. And so I think that basic asset inventory goes a long way, and then monitoring again continuously that your baseline, your inventory is what you think it is. From there, of course, you can get quickly to really good patch management, which I think, you know, as you and I discuss all the time, if we've learned nothing else from the last 3 years in the cybersecurity space, it's that if we aren't doing basic patch management well, what I tell people all the time, you know, two things. First, we make ourselves much more likely to be victims of any form of cyber attack, you know, whether that's ransomware or otherwise. If we're not keeping our systems patched, we are sitting ducks. But equally importantly, Aaron, and I think this is the more nuanced piece, those are the kinds of hacks that are going to have us condemned in the court of public opinion. So, you know, I tell our board of directors all the time, you know, if a company gets hacked because, you know, a North Korean advanced persistent threat uses some like super sexy, stealthy 0-day that no one's ever heard of or seen of before, and that's how they get compromised, that'll be bad. But, you know, we are not going to be hung from the rafters over that kind of breach. On the contrast, right, contrarily, if we end up breached because of a vulnerability that's been out there for a year, for which there are many proof of concept exploits, for which there are active Metasploit modules, if my 16-year-old son could learn how to use that exploit through a YouTube video, that is the kind of vulnerability which, if that's what gets us hacked, again, you know, for those of us in regulated environments, regulators are going to have no patience for that. And in that court of public opinion, that's the kind of thing that looks like gross negligence, Aaron, right? I mean, if we're not patching those known vulnerabilities in a timely manner, no one is going to have an iota of sympathy for us if we end up compromised as a result. So patch management has to be a close second. And then the third thing, and this is, again, it's an easy thing to do, but people don't do it, is that employee training. You know, and I know you are passionate about this as well, but getting our employees in a room or, you know, a Zoom room once or twice a year and walking them through, look, here are the things that we see going wrong. Here, you know, I give gold stars to our folks that are constantly passing their simulated phishing tests, but there also need to be some consequences for our recidivist failures, right? Somebody who can't get better in this, cybersecurity landscape. Maybe we do a little bit of public, you know, naming and shaming. In some cases, maybe that person can't work here anymore. But that kind of table stakes employee training, where you're talking about the risks and threats in the environment, you're talking about those that are specific to your business line, you're bringing in experts, right? You're leveraging. I mean, there are so many great products in that simulated phishing and employee training environment that really allow you to tailor that training to your business model and your risks and threats. I think if we're doing those things, right? Password manager is a great way to start. Asset inventory, really knowing where we are and who we are and what we're doing, getting that patch management to be timely and defensible, and then doing that employee training, I think we're 80% of the way there.
Yeah, and I think you hit on, you said asset, patch management, and then training. If you work with the government and you're responsible to be compliant with the CMMC, I think they would agree with you, because if you look at a lot of the controls, a lot of them are around the monitoring of your assets, the patching, the monitoring of continuously monitoring your environment, training, et cetera. So, I think it's great. I see some questions coming in on the Q&A, so I'm going to try to take these in order from kind of pre-breach to after a breach. So there's a great question from an anonymous attendee. It says, BYOD is making my life much harder as a network admin InfoSec staff. What are the best options that won't tick everyone off that we can do?
So it is a great question. And I am very empathetic. So I'm hearing you. And I do think that is why, I can tell you in financial services, Aaron, essentially everyone's moving away from BYOD. Now, I would argue that financial services firms are moving away from BYOD, not because it's a pain in the neck to administer, although I am empathetic again, not because there were data security concerns, right? I mean, we think that managed device solutions and, the secure containers that everyone is using and the monitoring, both at like the carrier level, and at the device level, I had a very high degree of confidence, in our BYOD solution, all of the components about it. But from a compliance perspective, and I know, many of the folks joining us today wear multiple hats, right? I mean, very few are those of us who can be solely concerned with cybersecurity and data security anymore. Most of us are now thinking about our jobs through a resilience lens, a business continuity lens. Many of us as CISOs, right, are all of a sudden chief privacy officers. None of us signed up for that. And many of us have compliance responsibilities. And so for me, the decision to move away from BYOD was not a data security decision, nor was it, an end user decision. It was a compliance decision, right? We didn't want to have employees communicating on personal devices, and the risk of having, BYOD and all of those things on a personal device was viewed as too high of a compliance risk. That said, again, thinking about our listener today, I am, I don't have a good answer for you in terms of how you do that in a way that doesn't make people angry, because I am dealing with like roving hordes of angry people now that I've taken away their BYOD. And so, I would love, Aaron, to have like again, selfishly, like a longer conversation about this with the person who's asking the question, because I don't think we industry-wide have cracked the code on this. I think we're all a little bit up in arms trying to find the right solution, and we haven't found it yet.
Yeah, I would agree with that. And I think what you're saying is if you can get away from BYOD, then that's probably preferred. And that's what larger, more regulated industries are doing. But if you can't,
yes,
agreed, it's a tough thing to do. Here's a quick hitter. Is it easier to defend or protect a PC, Mac, or Linux box?
So it's a really good question. And, I would tell you, like 5 years ago, and Aaron, I will admit to you to being, a little bit of an Apple person myself. I would have said 5 years ago that 85% of the exploit developers are working on Windows, and the vast majority of the implants are really Windows centric. I am hiding in obscurity on my MacBook, and so I'm safe. My perspective on that has changed. And so, now I would tell you I'm largely agnostic in both directions. And so I'll give you two reasons for my agnosticism here. One is that I think, certainly exploit developers, implant developers, they are, just like those of us in financial services, they're all about return on investment. And, when they see more and more, share of the market, more and more people buying MacBooks, of course, that's the direction of their development. And so now when you actually look at the developer community in this space, I wouldn't say it's 50-50, but there certainly is a concerted effort to identify, 0 days and to build and actually, weaponize exploits in the Mac space. The other reason, though, that I've become a little more agnostic is actually a result of what I think is really, really great work at Microsoft. So, those of you who have been with me in this space for a while know that we used to view, Windows Defender, as not quite a joke, but not much better than a joke, right? It was not something that there had been a lot of investment in. There were certainly better antivirus products on the market. Now I'd argue, and I say this just as someone who lives this space, I think Microsoft's done an amazing job with Defender. And so when you look at what they're doing, who knows the Windows operating system better, who's more embedded, in that tech stack, it makes me feel better about Windows in general, just because I think they have corporately, Aaron, made a real investment in being a safer and more secure product. So that's where, again, I'm agnostic. I think I've seen like strengths and weaknesses in both directions.
Follow-up question on that, sort of relating to the first question, was, do you feel that, you mentioned Defender has come a long way, and we agree. We've seen that with a lot of our customers where Defender can be a real option where it wasn't 3 to 4 years ago. Do you see risk with having more and more products in one ecosystem like Microsoft is doing?
So I think there's both benefit and risk. And, and Aaron, you and I talk about this a lot, that like, you end up with an all eggs in one basket problem. You end up with a complexity problem. You worry that you end up with sort of tunnel vision, and actually having some diversity of thinking going into this could be a good thing. But then you take that too far in the other direction, right? And you end up with local complexity at scale that's very difficult to manage and uncomfortable. And so, it's like everything in this space. I think it really is around finding that balance. And that balance is going to shift, right? I mean, there are things, to your point, right, that Defender is giving us now that it wasn't giving us years ago. But is it a panacea? Absolutely not. And is trying to do everything, right? I mean, I tell people this all the time, like, kind of pick your best athlete, be all in, don't try to bootstrap a million different products together, and I know how you feel about this too. But yeah, I think this is definitely one, there's I don't want to say the jury's out, but I think in a year we'll know better.
Well, and I agree with you. And I would say, just not just because they're sponsoring, but like Darktrace is a good example. I think that if you, as an end user in IT, if you look at what Microsoft pushes out and says, here's where we're really good and here's where we have great products, there are limits even within the Microsoft ecosystem where they would engage and trust partners to do things. And that's where someone like Darktrace comes in. Little plug for them. But I mean, really, like email security, and there's some other places where Microsoft just admittedly has not, I don't know if they will or has not at least yet developed a product to compete or catch the risk there. So that's where I think, as an end user, focus on where the products are developed and good and that you can use that make it easier and reduce risk, but know where they stop. So
well, and Aaron, I totally agree with you. And I also agree with you that Microsoft would say the exact same thing, right? So this isn't just we feel this way. They're fully versed in where their products begin and end. And I think the only thing I would add to that is, it's also, we all have to understand our own risk landscape. I mean, some of us, email is going to be, our off the chart biggest risk. I mean, again, for me, as someone who's like has a workforce that's getting emails from all over the world and lots of unsolicited sources and from many directions, trying to rely on Defender alone, which is not going to protect you in that space, would be insufficient.
Right. Yeah. And so Kip Hollingsworth, your question, I'm going to come to it in just a second because it's really after the fact of a cyber attack. There's a couple questions that were submitted when people registered for the webinar that I want to consolidate. There's a lot of what are the top 3. So I'm going to kind of consolidate these questions. What are the top 3 items every business, and there's a couple versions, CEO of an SMB or a nonprofit, but let's just say, what are the top 3 items every organization should start with to protect themselves? I know you answered this question at Tech Summit a little bit, but if you could either re-answer it or give advice on what are the top 3 things you can do. And then there's a follow-up question to this. What are the top 3 things you can do going into the holiday season to protect your organization?
So, I mean, Aaron, these are great. And, the holiday season piece of it, definitely adds an interesting component. So, when I talk to, to CEOs, when we talk to boards, about like, what are the questions they should be asking of their CTO, of their CISO, right? What are the probing pieces in that space? I think the number one question we really push them to answer is, describe, and this is not an easy question, what are your metrics for success in your cybersecurity program? So when we talk, Aaron, about like, we got all these products and all these integrations and we're layering things on top of each other, I find that, information security professionals, cyber professionals, there's some swath of us, and I've been guilty of this in my career, who are very ivory tower, and like any touch, any scan, any even pulse, right, is too much, right? It's not, we want this ivory tower, gold-plated cybersecurity solution to anything, and you get into that place where you're trying to protect everything to the highest standard, so you're really protecting nothing to that highest standard. So we really push boards and CEOs to ask this question, which not all of you cyber professionals are going to enjoy receiving, but like, what are the metrics associated with your company's cybersecurity program? And not just the idea that we, of course, want to reduce risk. I mean, we do, Aaron. We want, our cyber risk, our data loss risk, our insider risk, all of those things to be measurably and demonstrably reduced. Otherwise, why are we spending the money? What is the point of the program? But I frequently find that these cyber professionals, and again, I've been guilty of this too, can't articulate well their metrics for success. How do they know that things are better? And I'd argue you need both input metrics to that and output metrics. So are we actually seeing, a reduction in inherent risk at the upfront level? Have we done the right things to reduce our profile, to reduce our risk? And then are we actually seeing the outcomes we would expect on the back end in terms of, reduced data leakage incidents, reduced incidents, of all sorts within our environments? And so that's where I'm pushing CEOs, is that they actually need to have a metrics-driven program, which, again, not the sexiest thing, but otherwise, what are we measuring? How do we know we're making progress? In terms of the holiday season, this has been giving me fits for the last 2 weeks, and I'm talking to all of you as fellow practitioners here, but, my customers, my clients are, I don't know if they're taking like happy pills or stupid pills going into the holidays, but they have been doing like remarkably dumb things. And at the top of that list, Aaron, is falling for these social engineering scams. I literally had a woman I work with last week calls me. She had gotten a call, one of these classic IT scams where the guy tells her he's calling from Microsoft. She's got, quote, malware on her computer. He's there to help. She, gives him remote access to her machine. He's installing keystroke loggers and taking screenshots of all of her websites, figures out where she banks, all of this, calls her back and says, all right, well, I can fix your computer, but I need you to take $15,000 out of an ATM and, take it to this vape store on the Upper East Side and, deposit it into this, crypto wallet. Now, that sounds insane, Aaron, but it didn't occur to her that this was a problem until she was literally in the vape shop. She had done everything up to that point before she's like, this seems a little bit sus.
Did she give the money?
So at that point, she called me and said, I'm at a vape shop on the Upper East Side about to put $15,000, in, and I was like, Barbara, stop. No part of that sounds like a good idea. She's like, well, Microsoft told me. At that point, all I could do was laugh. But I mean, Aaron, I'd love to tell you that this was just like a one-off last week. But this is, especially for our parents, right? Our grandparents, aunts and uncles, our older employees, the customers we support. These fraudsters, right? These scam artists, they are incredible psychological warriors. And, they'll get on the phone with these people for hours and they'll bully them into submission. They'll convince them to do things that in the light of day seem just like unbelievable. How could you have possibly thought that was like a legitimate thing to do? But especially in the holiday season where people are lonely, people are isolated, certainly during the pandemic, this got worse. But everyone is picking up the phone when they shouldn't be. They're responding to things that, again, seem crazy, like when you say them out loud. But we see a lot of this during the holiday season. The other thing that I would highlight, just since we're on this topic, is we see a lot of phishing emails and a lot of fraudulent websites that are themed around charitable giving this time of year. And so if you think about the fact that like 75% of charitable giving in the United States takes place between Thanksgiving and Christmas, makes sense, right? That all of us are going to see, and our employees as well, a huge volume of phishing emails that are all charity themed, that are going to send people to malicious websites and do all the things that we would expect. In a lot of cases, it's not even a website that that's intended to exploit a browser, but rather just one that's collecting your bank account information, your credit card details, and then using them for fraud. So I have been talking to our workforce, even just as recently as this morning, about the fact that like any charitable giving you intend to do, which of course is a wonderful thing, you want to make sure you're doing it through reputable channels. because of course these hackers are going to take advantage of the fact that people are in that kind of charitable mindset.
And I don't think you're condoning not giving to charity. Just validate before you do give, because there's a lot of spams out there. It is a great time of year to give, but just make sure that you know where you're giving. All right, so we've got a number of questions that are kind of pre and post breach. So I'm going to kind of rapid fire a couple of these, and because I want to make sure Kip's question gets answered. Kip asked, what is your number one priority after recovering from a cyber attack where the attack vector was not determined?
Ooh, well, that is a scary place to be, Kip. I understand why you're asking this. Now, for all of us, like, let's hope that we are never, ever in that place. I mean, the only thing scarier than experiencing that cyber breach is getting to a place where at the end of the day, you're not sure what happened. And so, you know, my honest answer to this, Aaron, would be don't stop until you think you know, right? And you might be wrong, but if you don't think you've figured out what the root cause was, you know, my argument would be you need help, right? You need to bring in, you know, and Aaron, maybe it's call you, right? Like, we need to bring in more expertise to really get to the bottom of that. Because, you know, if we haven't addressed the core issue, you know, whether it was a phishing issue or an unpatched vulnerability, a supply chain type thing, you know, hardware concern, we want to understand that. Otherwise, you know, we're just going to leave that vulnerability open. But I would say, like, you know, if it were me, I would not stop. I wouldn't rest until I had, you know, a good sense of what that root cause was. You know, once you're there, then of course you want to address that. You want to fix that. But again, I'd be really, really nervous. You know, I will tell you, I'm working with one of my third-party vendors right now who as recently as today told me that they had not yet figured out root cause. And I basically said to them, I'm not going to do business with you until you do, you know, and I want to see the report. Like, I want to see the forensic examination. I want to see what they've determined as outcomes. And then I want to see the steps they've taken to remediate that. But like, just saying, I'm not sure what happened, I don't think any of us should be satisfied with that.
So there's a follow-up question that sort of relates, and I think this is coming from potentially maybe an organization that doesn't quite have the resources that like a Morgan Stanley or the NSA would, but what are resources that organizations could use to get more information on the attacker landscape and vectors? They said, caveat, I know she spent a lot of years with the NSA, but are there resources that the government uses that are available to everyone, but we just don't know about them?
So it's a really good question. And, you know, it's probably something, you know, selfishly, Aaron, that like you and I could put our heads together on the side and like come up with like our, you know, 10, 15 favorite cybersecurity blogs that we read religiously.
Yeah.
And I would tell you, I think, you know, my whole team, right? Like, we're just, because we're junkies for this, we're constantly like reading what we read and sending it to each other. I think that culture of learning in our respective workforces, really incentivizing that, hey, you know, I discovered this thing and I found it to be really helpful, so I sent it to the team, and, you know, and then you sort of are building that. I think that can be helpful. I think the government, you know, even what CISA puts out, I think those announcements are really, really helpful. And then there's just a lot of like subscription services, right? Especially when a new vulnerability has been discovered, you know, reading passionately, as we all do, the release notes around a patch. I think you can learn a ton about cybersecurity from release notes. So those would be things that I would recommend off the bat. But I just think there's a lot out there, you know, that is even quite like layman's terms that can really get people up to speed in this space. I'm so excited that people want to learn more.
Yes, and I think that's a great idea. We can share some of our favorite cybersecurity resources. I'm happy to do that and put our heads together. Here's another question that is very different, but it's very specific. So bear with me on this one. A coworker told me yesterday she was almost taken for $5,000 in an Indian PayPal scam. Fortunately, she called her bank and they said an 80-year-old customer recently lost $58,000. This is not petty theft at all, and they were needing her routing numbers. What is the government doing to stop and prosecute scammers, and can they stop the ones in India, Africa, Eastern Europe, etc.?
So this is a fantastic question. You know, and it really gets to what we were just talking about, Aaron, that, you know, especially for at-risk populations, you know, younger people, older people, folks that maybe have some financial duress, we see all of them as more likely victims for this kind of thing. But to the great part of the question in terms of like, what can the government do? What I would tell all of you guys is that two things. First, from like an FBI perspective, the Federal Bureau of Investigations, they would be the first to tell you that if you are not talking about a $7-figure loss, right? If you're not talking $1 million or more, the Bureau really is not going to put cycles towards this. So, your insurance company is going to want you to file a police report, right? In the same way that you would if you were, things were stolen from you in any way, shape, or form. But the police are not going to do anything about that police report. The federal government is not going to get involved unless we're talking about really significant dollar losses. And the thing that's unfortunate about that, Aaron, is that the hackers and fraudsters have figured that out. And so, they will intentionally go for dollar figures that are right below those local and federal thresholds for prosecution. Now, the other great thing about this question is it really speaks to the jurisdictional aspects of the challenge here, right? Where you're talking about hackers and fraudsters that are in India, Bangladesh, Ghana, Nigeria, Sierra Leone, all these pockets of the world where even if the federal authorities were able to determine who this was, right, where it was coming from, you think about, the jurisdictional limitations of those sorts of prosecutions, and you really end up in a place where there really isn't much the federal government can do. The last thing I would say here, Aaron, and this is what really, I think has stymied us over the last 2 years, you think about these big ransomware conglomerates, right? If these companies that conduct these ransomware attacks were real companies, right? If they were legitimate, they would be Fortune 500 companies. I mean, these are huge, thousands of employees, huge amounts of infrastructure, covert fraudulently purchased infrastructure. They are huge companies, but they're organized like the mafia, right? They are organized in a very self-protective way, which means that, all stages of a ransomware attack, while they string together to result in something very dangerous and lucrative, they're all isolated from each other at a lower level. So you could imagine, you have the one subsidiary of the ransomware company that achieves the initial access. They then pass that initial access on to the company, the aspect of the company that's going to do the privilege escalation, the lateral movement, the persistence establishment, all of those stages. Once that's done, they're going to hand it off to another part of the company that's going to do the exfiltration of your sensitive data. That'll be a different specialty. From there, they're going to hand it to the people who actually encrypt your systems so that you are experiencing the ransomware attack. Those people are going to hand it off to the talkers that actually negotiate the ransom, and then finally over to the customer support department, which will make sure that you had a wonderful ransomware experience. Now, because the company, the ransomware company, is organized that way, think about it in terms of prosecution. These ransomware companies are organized such that none of these people know, right? They're all anonymous to each other. I'm the guy who gets initial access. I hand it over to the person I don't know who does privilege escalation. Because of the way those companies are organized, Aaron, even if I could identify one link in the chain, that link, again, doesn't connect to anything that the authorities can do anything with. And the companies are very clearly organized in that way to avoid, just like they would in the mafia, avoid anyone being able to rat out the entirety of the gang. No one sees the big picture, and that's totally intentional.
Ooh, it's scary. Yeah, I mean, so it sounds like for this question specifically, 58K may not be enough for the government to really go after. And so this goes back to the preventative measures that you talked about in the question before. Don't click, don't do things that feel wrong. Stop. You're rarely going to get a phone. You're rarely, if ever, going to get a phone call from someone to do something. I think it's be more proactive, because unless it's a lot of money, it's not going to really get raised to the level of the government.
So that's exactly it, Aaron. I mean, the government is not going to help. Of course, your bank is going to try, but once that money is out the door, and if you authorize that transaction, there's not a lot that they can do. So it just becomes really tough, which I think is why, your point is exactly right. Making sure that people are educated up front, that phone call is not what it appears to be. Ask those second order questions. When in doubt, hang up the phone and call your bank directly. Don't be authorizing those transactions. Don't be giving people access to your computer. Don't be handing over your, credentials to foreign parties. These all seem like really basic things, but it's the mistakes we see people making constantly.
Yeah. We've got another question, a little bit different category, but how severe of a threat is insider risk? Is it a top priority for you and Morgan Stanley? Do you see it as a priority for companies in general, or more of a nice to have capability?
So this is a fantastic question. I mean, I will tell you, and Aaron, you know this, I see this as a top priority, but probably not in the way that our audience thinks I mean. So we all are aware, right, that we could have a malicious insider. We could have someone who, is planted by a foreign government, maybe planted by a competitor, who's here in our ranks with the intent of doing something malicious, doing something evil. Yes, I worry about those people. Yes, I think we need to be focused on them. And depending on the industry that we're supporting, right? So certainly you think about my years at the NSA with all of the industrial and contractors we worked with, all of the defense consultants that obviously need to be very concerned about nation states trying to plant spies to conduct espionage in their environments. That's one set of concerns. But the biggest concern I have now when it comes to insiders is not actually the malicious insider, it's the incompetent insider. So it's my employee who is not a bad person, but is maybe looking to expedite their work, maybe is cutting some corners, is trying to do the right thing, but maybe going about it in the wrong way. And so this is where, when you think about data leakage controls, I think the onus is on all of us to really do what we can to make the wrong thing really difficult and make doing the right thing the easiest path. I mean, humans, it's human nature, right? They are going to do, they're going to take the easiest path they can to achieve their goal, achieve their objective. If we in security can make that easy path also the secure path and vice versa, our employees are happier, our systems are secure, our data is better protected. It's when we're in these situations where, you make it really difficult for employees to operate. This is how you end up with shadow IT, right? This is how you end up with employees conducting business out of your network, off of your devices. You don't want that, right? That introduces a whole bunch of additional risk. But I would argue, those are not malicious insiders. Those are simply people who are trying to do their jobs, but, haven't been given a good path to do that. So one of the things that I spend a lot of time on in my job is actually identifying what we call risky business processes. So these are business processes where, again, employees are trying to do the right thing, but we haven't set them up with the right tech, the right process, the right training, the right procedures to make doing that process something we can feel consistently safe about. And so again, my focus, and I would argue for all of us, we've totally got to be focused on evil, but we can't lose sight of the fact that stupid is a much bigger risk on a day-to-day basis to our networks, our systems, and our data.
Yeah, and I think we saw an example of this the other day, and I hate to pick on someone, but I had a CIO the other day who said, I don't want to put MFA in place anywhere because it slows people down. But I think to your point,
oh God,
that's an example of where you can prevent a lot of stupid mistakes by adding one simple step that's not that more complicated and doesn't take that much time in the grand scheme of things when there's much larger risks out there. And so I think that's an example of how do you prevent stupid to someone that is not necessarily intending to be bad. So we see it all the time.
Well, and Aaron, I have to tell you though, I'm shocked by that. Like in 2022, I mean, you and I talked about this. If there was any silver lining to the pandemic, it was that those of us in the security space, I think, finally got the opportunity to show that some of these security controls, like MFA, that we had been talking about for years, that went from being nice to have to all of a sudden being absolutely crucial, the world didn't end. Like employees didn't actually revolt when they had to, authorize that login from their personal device. All of those things that everyone told us would just be that everyone would resign in protest, that didn't happen. So I'm surprised in 2022 that people still have that concern. I mean, folks are using, what can you do without MFA in this day and age? What did you tell them?
I mean, we kind of said like in 10 different ways, pretty much everyone is requiring it now. There's really no way to get around this. You can't log into your bank, and you can barely log into like a gaming system without MFA at this point. But I think it's just potentially a misalignment from understanding what their job is to prevent risk, and just not willing to kind of upset the apple cart and change. But we see them from time to time. Unfortunately, this was not a small organization, and so I think it's only a matter of time. I believe they had already been hit once, so the fact that it was still like this, I don't know how much longer that person will be in the role, but we see it more often than like, to your point about the person who was in the vape shop about to give $15,000. You would think that never happens, but we still see it every day. So, I kind of coming over the top of what you said and said, these are the measures we can take to prevent insider risk in the, the kind of the stupid actions that we might take. So Rachel, there's another question I want to get to here. What would be your best advice for IT leaders about what information to share with their executive leadership in order to gain approval for budget on security initiatives? I see my company spend millions on marketing, but when asking for budget regarding security, there's always pushback releasing the budget.
Well, this is the $1 million question. It's what all of us struggle with. And it's an interesting thing because I think the strategy that like CISOs used to use, and again, I was guilty of this too, is, you'd go into the C-suite, you'd go into the boardroom, and, I don't want to say we tried to baffle them with bullshit, but we certainly did a lot of tap dancing around, the world is a really, really scary place. And you'd go in there and you'd be talking about advanced persistent threats and how, we don't want to go the way of Bangladesh. And we saw all kinds of what I would tell you were very, impressive theatrical performances from CISOs that were trying to get, security budget, through most of the last 10 years. I think what we've learned from that experience, though, is that is not, that might get you like the first chunk of cash in the door, but that's not how you sustain a budget over time, because every time you give that scary song and dance, it has a little bit less impact than the time before. You can't just, attempt to scare the pants off the board and think that that's going to mean, endless torrents of money coming in your direction after that. This is, again, why, you heard me make such a point, Aaron, around metrics and being able to show a soup to nuts cybersecurity program. So what I see C-suites being impressed with is come in and show them, look, here is our top-down cybersecurity program. Here's what we're investing in technology. Here's where we think we have gaps. Here's what we're doing with the workforce. Here's our cyber insurance policy. We've really thought this through end to end. Here's how we're going to hold ourselves accountable for progress. Here's how we're going to measure our success. And when we look at our budget, we think that if you spend another $10 here, here, and here, you could measurably and demonstrably lower our cyber data protection fraud risk. And if we spend it, we're going to show you whether it worked or not. That's what boards want to see. These are, these C-suite executives, right? They are very numbers-driven people. If you can show them where you are in terms of measurable and demonstrable risk for the money that you've spent heretofore, and then you show them those points of investment, not just because the world is a scarier place, right? Not just because Russia invaded Ukraine, but because through the lens of your business model, you see risks and threats that need to be addressed, and you're tracking the metrics that are going to allow you to demonstrate that progress. We see that goes a really long way. And the other thing I would say, Aaron, is that our security professionals have got to be arm in lockstep with their business. So if your business partners are the ones pounding the table saying, we need to be spending more on cybersecurity, we need to grow out the cybersecurity team, that, if you can let other people make your pitch for you, that can go such a long way. And for the business professionals, that really means understanding the degree to which security can be a huge competitive advantage for them, right? It can be a differentiator. If you're a company for which the security of your customer data is existential to your business model, then your business partners should be the ones clamoring for improvements in your infrastructure, for enhancements to your encryption, for more investment in secure storage. They've got to see those linkages. And so, again, I'm a big fan. I mean, I spend more time with my business partners than I do with my technology partners, because I want them to be the ones feeling that they are in the driver's seat for where we are going from a cybersecurity perspective. And I want them to be the ones pounding the table, deeply invested in our security success, recognizing that it's directly linked and correlated to their business success.
Couldn't say it better myself. And I think that, you know, if for those of you who've ever followed like technology business management as a philosophy, which is used in enterprise organizations on the spending side of kind of infrastructure, et cetera, I think it's similar. It's evolving with security because it's less of an ROI and it's more of what is the risk. And so I think the metrics are key, and showing your progression is key. So thank you for that. I want to kind of wrap it up, Rachel. Any closing thoughts before you go for anyone out there going into the holiday season who's responsible for their security program? What advice would you give?
So I would say that now is not the time to blink, Aaron, right? Like we've seen this over years, right? This is, the hackers totally know that we're about to be distracted, that we're all going to be trying to make the most of the time with our families, and you know, especially this year, many of us get together for the first time. I've got my whole team on heightened alert for the next few weeks, right? I've just said, we've seen so much activity this year. I am worried going into the holidays. And the other thing, though, that I said is, like, you know, none of us can do it alone. You know, and I think next year, you know, our focus, and I know it'll be yours as well, is all about, you know, how do we use partnerships as a force multiplier. You and I have talked about this a lot, you know, this idea of, I'm just going to hire like infinite people into my SOC and declare success. Totally untenable solution for a whole bunch of reasons, especially going into next year. And so I think the holidays give us an opportunity to think about, you know, if we had to do things on a leaner budget over the long term, you know, who knows what the economy holds for next year. If we had to do more with less, how would we do it? And I think the answer is we would do more of it through partnerships. And I think the holidays give us a great chance to take a step back and try to think more strategically. All too often, I think people are just trying to throw bodies at this problem. And that's definitely not going to work moving forward.
Takes people, process, and technology all in one. Well, I want to thank you, Rachel, again for joining us. I think we'll probably get the same feedback, that they could listen to you for another day, another month, another year. We really appreciate your partnership with Opkalla to help our customers and our people understand the cyber risks. Josh and the Dark Trace team, I want to thank you for making this possible. For those of you, like I said, Josh shared his information. We will share it again. If you have follow-up questions, please send them our way, and we'll work with Rachel to get answers, and we'll share some of the cyber resources we talked about. We will also, if you missed this, we will have this webinar available to anyone who did not catch this or had to leave early. Once again, if we don't talk to you before, happy holidays to all, and I hope everyone has a great rest of the week and year. Rachel, Josh, thank you for joining me today.
Absolute pleasure, Aaron.